Welcome to Simply Sewing with Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and there are many different collars that we can get for shirts. Two-piece collars, small, large, high, many different styles. Then we can get a style that is attached to the shirt front, and that's what this is like. So we have this front fabric that makes that collar, and then we have a facing that shows up at the top. Now these collars can be small, they can be a little bit bigger. That facing can be a different fabric, so you really notice the collars, or it can all blend in. We can always change the sleeves, put darts in it, make it longer or shorter, but the collar is a one piece, or it's a continuous collar. They're a lot of fun to make, and they're very easy to make because there's not a lot of fussiness going on at the top collar part. So I'm going to make one of these shirts with this collar that comes right from the front pattern. The pattern that I'm going to be making today is a McCall's pattern, M6750. And we can see that it has that one piece collar. So the collar slides over to the front. And when you look at the diagrams, you can see that that's that collar that flips over. This pattern has a little collar attached. So when you look at the back, you can see that line, which means it has a piece attached. So the pattern we're looking for is this one piece collar. And in the back, you can see that it doesn't look like there's a collar piece. And that's the style that we're looking for. So I will be using this McCall's pattern. When I have a pattern that I like to use often, I will trace it out on tracing paper. So the pattern pieces are the same, I've just retraced them. And the fabric I'm going to use today is from Benartex, and it is called Poppy Promenade. And this is considered a quilting cotton. And quilting cotton is a great fabric to use for these types of shirts. That cotton really does hold its shape, so it always looks nice and crisp. We do not need a lot of pieces for this pattern. We're going to need a back, and this pattern has the back placed on a fold. We have the front piece, so I will need two of these. So we're going to have the front area where the buttons are going to go. And from that last button up to the neckline, this area is that collar. So this is the area that it's going to go over. So we have the shoulder, the back neck, and that is going to be that flipped over collar. And I did choose a round hem, and my darts are transferred on my pattern pieces. I've also chosen to do a short sleeve. This is going to be a really short sleeve with a 2-inch cuff. We need two other pattern pieces, and those pieces need to have an interfacing put on them. I will need a back facing. This piece is going to go on the back of the shirt, so it will need to be placed on the fold. And it's going to fit right up here at the top. In order for this collar to come over, we need a facing. So we have a long piece of facing that's going to go on the shirt, and this piece is going to be that inside piece that turns over. So we will need the front facing and the back facing stabilized on our fabric. The stabilizer I'm going to use today is from Fairfield. It's a lightweight fusible interfacing. So we have little glue dots on one side and a soft fabric on the other. And this is going to stabilize those pieces. The pattern instructs us to cut one out of our main fabric and one out of the interfacing, and then put those interfacings together. Well, I find it's a lot easier if I put the interfacing on first. It does take a little bit more interfacing, but I find it's more accurate, quicker, and easier. So I have that stabilizer already ironed onto the back of my fabric, and I know this piece is a little bit bigger, which is what I want. With that already stuck on, it's just easier for me to cut. I made sure my fabric pieces were big enough. Now I'm going to be able to cut this out. I don't have to worry about lining up these fabrics as I fuse them together. And it's very easy now to cut out. For the front facing, I've done the same thing. Now I'm going to be able to cut that out. Before I take those patterned pieces off, I do mark all of the markings like those darts with some tracing paper. So I'm going to sew those darts first. When the darts have been stitched, the darts need to be pressed towards the inside. So we're going towards the back for the back pieces, and for the front pieces, it's going to go towards the center of the front. Once these darts are all done, we're going to be able to start and put the shirt together. Match the side seams and the shoulder seams. We need to stitch a 5/8 seam allowance. Throughout the entire project, we are going to use that 5/8 seam allowance. Once that 5/8 seam allowance is done, we can neaten up these edges. We can do a zigzag on the sewing machine, or if you have a serger, you can clean those off with a serger. So for every seam we do, we get to finish the edge. Once the body is done, we're going to be able to work on the facing. The facing are those two pieces that we cut out with the inner facing. We have those two long front facings, and this point is that area is going to be folded over, and we have the back facing. These two edges are going to be stitched together. So we can match up those right edges and stitch those seams together. So I will be stitching that 5/8 seam allowance and then finishing those edges off with the serge stitch. This facing piece is now the same shape as this front area where the buttons go, that collar that flips over, and the back neckline. So we're going to be able to match up these seams so the right sides of the fabric are touching each other. All of these edges are going to match up. We have the bottom of that front. This is where the buttons will go. Comes up to the collar and around to the back. We will be able to use that same 5/8 seam allowance. Start on one side, stitch up all the way around, and come back. Once this facing has been stitched on, we're going to be able to turn it right side out. But we can do a little trimming in the corner to make this area not so bulky. We need to trim off this corner. We're going to cut off this triangle and a little bit on this side. So we're having these little pieces trimmed off. We also need to trim a little bit along the back of the neck. So we have that 5/8 seam allowance. This edge with the inner facing, we can trim that down to about 1/4 of an inch. The fabric behind, we want to make it just a little bit bigger. So we have the one short seam and a little bit taller in the back. From here we can do a couple of little trims along that back collar. We're going to take the scissors and just trim to the stitching line. So just put a couple of little notches in along that back curve, so it'd be on the back of the neck. Those little trim lines is going to make that so it opens up a little bit. And when we turn this over, it's going to help keep this as a nice round curve. Once these corners are trimmed and this edge is trimmed, we're going to be able to turn this right side out. With that facing pressed over, we have that front collar already in place. Before we do anything else with the collar, we're going to put the sleeves on. So depending on your sleeves, you can follow the directions. I'll match up my seams and sew that sleeve on. The sleeves are on and complete. The facing is on. From here, we're going to finish off the hem. The hem also will be a 5/8 seam allowance. And there's a way that we can clean off this edge and start that hem all at the same time. We have that facing piece that has been stitched on, and it's going to go towards the back. But to do the hem, we're going to have it facing towards the front so that the right sides are touching. Match up the edges, make sure your seam is flat, and stitch 5/8 of an inch. So we're going to start on one side and do a back stitch and lock it off. We're going to do this both to the left and right side. With this facing stitched onto the bottom, when we turn it right side out, all of this raw edge is going to be inside. But we can trim off a little bit of this facing. trim off a little bit of that point and then that facing fabric. So we're going to have about 1/4 of an inch. We still have that original 5/8 on the shirt front, but the facing has been trimmed down. Now we can turn this right side out. So the raw seams are now inside. The edge has that nice finished edge to it. We're going to be able to continue and roll this seam down. It will end up being a 5/8 seam, but we're going to do a little rolled seam. So roll that fabric down once, roll it again. From here, we can stitch this down. We're going to be able to do that for the entire hem, and we'll get to the same on the other side. With this rolled edge top stitched down, it comes right underneath this facing. And we can continue and do a little row of top stitching all the way around. So it will go all the way around, coming right back to the ends. We can add the buttonholes and the buttons, and we're done. As we go through, be sure to have all of your edges finished. So for this little facing part, I just did a serge stitch and ironed it down. So for the inside, it looks nice. And it has a clean finish going all the way around that collar. The shirt is now done. The pattern pieces consisted of the 2 fronts, 1 for the back, the sleeves, the facing for the buttons and that collar, and a little piece in the front, and that is it. This first button and buttonhole will give the collar its size. So wherever you put that button, the collar is going to stop at that point. So that collar is part of that whole shirt. And the shirt is done. Having no fussy collar really makes it a quick and easy shirt to do. There's no back collar. That back piece just ends. And that little facing goes inside to give it that nice finished look. This button sets the stage for this collar. If we want a smaller collar, we could add another button and the collar is going to get a little bit smaller. But it is still that one piece that's front of that shirt. That facing inside also can be done in different colors and in different fabrics. So the shirt has a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities with different fabrics, different combinations of fabrics, different sleeves, different lengths. And that simple collar makes it, well, very simple to do. If you've ever wanted to make a shirt, this is definitely a fun one to try. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.